The subject this morning, food, fasting, and fads, seems a little strange to such a wonderful spiritual service, but there's one thing which I would like to point out is this. The Master once said to me, he said, remember, he said, this vehicle which you have is the only vehicle you'll have to find God. And so if we look at it that way, I think perhaps the subject is more in keeping for Sunday morning. I'll say at this time that in a few minutes I'll try to just give you some highlights on a subject which I know can be discussed up to even 2 hours. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm going to try. But I will say this, that those of you who wish to leave are perfectly welcome to do so. I know the time has run over quite a bit, and yet there are others who have come here just to perhaps find out something about food and fasting and fast. So please feel free to leave, if you will, quietly, and I'll just try and give you a few highlights on the subject of food, fasting, and fad. One basic rule we should remember, and this rule comes from Sri Yukteswarji himself. The basic rule is this, that the food should be natural, vital, and non-irritating. That's an important thing. Natural food, vital food, non-irritating. Now, some people, we all know that raw food is very vitalizing. And yet some people cannot handle it. And so the Sri Yukteswarji in his wisdom said, be sure you can handle the food, whatever food that you can handle, a natural food, without upsetting your digestion. If it upsets your digestion, you will not assimilate it. That should be your natural food. He also made some observations that unless the nursing mother received in her diet vegetables, grains, and fruits, milk was not produced for the offspring. And so he concluded from his work in the Holy Science that various grains, fruits, roots, and for a beverage, milk, and water that exposed to the sunlight was the best natural food for man. It is easily digested and assimilated. That's the important thing. Now you take milk, for instance, sometimes it's hard to digest. That seems strange, it is so. And I remember the Master said, take a little bit of it, spread it out throughout the day and chew it well. Then you can handle it. So we must use the reason and the common sense which we have in this matter of diet. Fried foods. You know, fried foods are not good. They're hard to digest. The fat molecule is hard to break down. And yet we eat fried foods and then we feel it. And yet we keep on. We must be reasonable and take those non-irritating foods. That's an important point, which Sri Yukteswarji brought out. A food that you can handle. And then you will have less trouble. In his own words, he said this about diet. His advice to students was as follows. Any simple diet which provides what you need, a natural diet suited to one's constitution, is the right one. Because one man's food is another man's poison, without question of a doubt. Each one of us is different. And so we must remember that in food. To take those non-irritating foods, natural if possible, natural vital food, and keeping away from the heavy proteins, as I will come to in just a moment. To live, we have to have proteins, carbohydrates, fats, minerals, salts, water, and nowadays vitamins, because the food is so unnatural. The Master often warned that vegetarians must be careful to get enough protein. That's the important thing. Get enough protein. That's why a vegetarian diet augmented by dairy products seems to be the best, and which the Master recommended. Well, people say, well, now, you look at the cow. Cow in the field forms a great big body from eating grass. But who wants to be a cow? To eat all the time. To get that protein, you'd have to eat a cartload of grass. And I have even seen the cows eating at night. They eat all the time. So we must be careful not to be lax in the amount of protein which we get. That's very important. Very important to vegetarians. Now, proteins. There's one important thing I want to point out about protein. There are two kinds of proteins, flesh proteins plus dairy products. And the sad thing is that flesh proteins give the greatest amount of protein available, up to about 25%. The dairy products and the grains give only about 15% of available protein. But there are other factors which we must watch. In the flesh proteins and the dairy products, the composition of protein is the same, the chemical composition is the same. But you know and I know there's a difference there. I had that pointed out in a wonderful illustration during wartime. We used a remedy made up of gum camphor and other things. During the war, Java was cut off and we were unable to obtain gum camphor. So DuPont made it synthetically, same chemical composition as natural gum camphor. But when you used it, instead of it having a soothing action, it was an esclerotic. Why? Same chemical composition, because my druggist wrote to DuPont. They said it's absolutely the same chemical composition. There was something different in the rate of vibration of that. That's the point. So in protein, although the chemical composition of fresh protein and dairy products is the same, there is a great difference. Just like you go into one house, there'll be a certain vibration. You go into another, and there'll be another vibration. So, due to the highly developed nervous system of the animals that are killed and the hate developed at that time, the vibration is different in the protein of flesh foods than dairy products. There is no such undesirable vibration in dairy products. So that's an important thing to remember. That there is something else enters into it besides just the chemical composition of protein. There's that vibration which is not good for us. Another important point about proteins is this, that dairy products, 90% is available for use in the body. In flesh foods, only 70%. And in grains, only about 65%. So what happens? In the flesh foods we ingested, it's irritating because only 70% can be broken down. The rest floats around in the bloodstream as toxin. And that is very undesirable. Even though the protein in the grains, only a certain percent, 65%, is usable, the rest floats around, but it's not so undesirable because the vibration is different. That's an important point to remember. And I have found out lately that Dr. Gruner of McGill University has made tests, blood tests, for those who had malignancy. And he found that pork products gave a positive reaction, just as in malignancy. So the things point that it is not conclusive, but it points to the fact that flesh foods are not desirable because of that particular vibration that is there. And they cannot be completely broken down, only 70%. The rest floats around in the bloodstream and causes the trouble. Through gravity settles throughout our body, causing trouble. Now, one other thing that comes to my mind is this. Dr. Kempner proved that. He proved that if he took his patients completely off flesh foods and fed them on rice, a rice diet, 90% of the protein is usable by the body. 90%. He found that the organs such as the kidneys regenerated and came back to normal. Imagine that. Because they gave the body a chance. by stopping the ingestion of these proteins which cannot be broken down and float around, causing us all sorts of trouble. So let us remember those one or two things about protein. Protein is very necessary as you get along a little bit to repair tissue. Nothing else will do it. So it's necessary to have proteins. Therefore, a vegetarian diet, augmented by dairy products, plus as milk, eggs, cheese, and so forth, is the best. Buttermilk is one of the best. Goat's milk is one of the best proteins, and cheese. And these things must be taken into consideration. Dr. Das was here, who was a colleague of the two gentlemen with us this morning, several years ago, and he conducted a test on the members of the colony, I remember in Encinitas, who lived on this vegetarian diet, augmented by dairy products, and he found that their blood content was right. Hemoglobin was right. Everything was up to par. So that's a wonderful thing to realize that you can be a vegetarian if you watch the protein content and do not overlook that. Green vegetables, of course, are very easy on the system. Very easy on the system. The grains are easy on the system. And so if we watch that, have fresh vegetables and fruits, and live on that diet, and milk, plus good, clean, pure water, that by all means is the best diet for us. We need plenty of fluids because the body, as you know, is 75% to 90% water, and we need plenty of fluids to dilute the gastric juices, the different juices of the body, and fruit juices, of course, are wonderful for their mineral salts. I'm just quickly going over these things that you may get just the highlights of this subject. One other thing, the vitamins. Due to the artificiality of the age in which we live, and all these enriched things and bread and so forth, they supply the vitamins, but there's something left out. We must have in our diet the vital thing, the whole wheat, not the white flour, the whole wheat. But that vital principle, there's something in there that is necessary. And so we should do away with artificial foods and foods made of white flour, because that is not the same as whole wheat. The master used to say it's like glue in the intestines, clogging things up. So we must keep away from artificial or refined foods. Foods made from white flour, the same thing. Keep away from them. Have natural foods, honey, raw sugar, whole wheat bread, just to say one or two things. Another interesting observation, I have found out that coal tar products are used extensively in coloring food nowadays and giving certain flavors. Coal tar products produce malignancy of the skin. And there's a terrific amount of coal tar products ingested by food in the form of coloring, artificial colorings, and artificial flavors. Keep away from them. Things are pointing that way. We should avoid those things. Have natural foods, and they are the best because they contain the vital principle. So much just in a few words for food. Now about fasting. Fasting, there are lots of fads about fasting. This and that, this diet and that diet. I hear it all the time. So-and-so does this diet, I'm going to try it. Each one of us is different. Each one of us is a law unto ourselves. If you're going to diet, see a physician. Work with him. He knows what to do. He will tell you. But don't just start off on a tangent because Mrs. So-and-so is taking up that diet, so I guess I will try it. If you have some sickness, like obesity, diabetes, and those things, it's necessary to diet. That's a different thing. But otherwise, be reasonable. Fasting is good for this reason, that it gets the mind out of the rut it's in, the rut of eating. And when the mind gets into a rut, it becomes less efficient to carry on the different functions of the body. So if you just say, now, you're not eating today, that's all, make it do it, then the mind is stronger. It gets out of the rut. Just like when you take a vacation. You're in a rut, you take a vacation, you feel wonderful when you come back. Because you got out of the rut. You're more efficient. So with eating, we'll be more efficient in our eating and assimilation and all those things if we get the mind out of the rut it's in. That's one of the greatest things of fasting. And the other is that it helps us to live by the presence of God, by the cosmic energy within us. Thou shalt not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth from the mouth of God. All the cosmic energy that comes in through the medulla center, that's what sustains us. That's what breaks down the food. We may eat a natural diet, vital diet, but if it were not for that life force within us, we would not utilize it. So, and the final thing, it is the life force flowing in through us. If we are in tune with God, it flows naturally. We assimilate our food in the best possible way. So be sensible in your fasting. The Master's advice is wonderful. I'll give it to you just in a word or two. He says, take one day, once a month in the sun, nothing else. That vitalizes you, recharges you. Another way is oxygen fasting. Take one day, once a month, 10 minutes of every day in the sun with deep breathing. Then the oxygen keeps you from getting hungry, sustains you. And then his other advice is to one day, once a month, live only on fruit and fruit juices. You see, that gives the system and the mind a chance to rest, to get out of the rut of having solid foods and condiments and all that business. Get out of it. One day, once a month, live on fruit. The Master was very reasonable. But sometimes in sickness, if it's necessary to take a cleansing diet, that's all right. 7-day diet, 5-day diet, 7-day diet, 9-day diet is good. But remember, in that case, you keep eating certain things. But they contain more mineral salts and things like that which flush out the system. But those things are good if they're done when you need it, not just as a fad. Follow the natural laws of eating, as I have pointed out. As Sri Yukteswarji said, have a natural, vital, non-irritating diet. Augment it that you get plenty of protein through dairy products. That protein vibration is far different from the vibration of flesh foods, as I have tried to point out to you, and which science is finding out without question of a doubt, that flesh foods, the proteins, are not good due to the waste products which are left in the system.